for joining us for this first panel discussion. For those who don't know me, my name is Michael Washbourne. I'm the Deputy Editor of PayDirt Media, and I'm joined by three very distinguished explorationists, let's call it. To my immediate left, most in the room would know Mark Wilson of Legend Mining, and a legend of nickel, I'd imagine. Next to Mark is Caben Marriott, the Managing Director of Western Mines Group, and on the very far end is Alan Kelly of Miramar Resources. So the underlying theme of today's panel, I guess, is sort of what incentivises exploration for nickel in the current market climate. And obviously we've seen over the last couple of years the industry dominated a fair bit by Indonesia, which leads me to my first question to Mark. You've spent a lot of time looking at the Indonesian sector, and we keep hearing all these stories about there being this endless supply of cheap nickel. What's been your take on it, Mark? Are those market forecasts correct?
Testing you, we've got you. Michael, yes and no. I'm an optimist. I guess if you're an explorer, you have to be. And the way I look at Indonesia is it's set a floor of roughly $15,000 a tonne for nickel. And I'm sure there are plenty in this room who remember times when it was a hell of a lot less than that. I think, just to give a bit of perspective on the nickel market, which I always like to talk to if I'm giving presentations, at a recent conference in Jakarta, the analysts, almost to a man, said there's going to be a surplus of nickel for the next 5 years, and for those of you, more produced than consumed. And I have a lovely saying about forecasters. They fit in two categories: those who don't know and those who don't know they don't know. So I'd sort of take that a bit with a pinch of salt. But Indonesia itself is an extraordinary place where it has the actual capacity to produce the world's demand of nickel, predominantly for stainless steel, because that's where it's generally used. But at this conference, there are a lot of anecdotes that producers in Indonesia are feeling the pinch. A lot of them cannot produce at the current price. And again, I think that's an upside for nickel explorers, that the price is probably on a floor and can go one way. I've just got a couple of slides which I'd like to show, and hopefully if I press this button, the first one comes up. It's already there. Beautiful. I've always been a bit cranky at this expression that Indonesia's flooding the market with cheap nickel. And if you look at that graph that's on the left-hand side, the blue line is consumption and the yellow line is production. And the date goes back to 2000 and through to 2023, I think that is, where I first saw this. And the source of it is Jim Lennon, who's generally regarded as a bit of a guru in the nickel space. And what he's done is he's actually combined China and Indonesia together and called them one outfit. And so Blind Freddy can see there that from 2000, the combined numbers from Indonesia and China, both in production and supply, just increased in a basically unbelievably linear manner. And for people to just come out and say Indonesia is flooding the market, don't really understand that what's happened is that the Chinese industrial investment has moved from China to Indonesia, and so the supply is seen to be coming from Indonesia, whereas before it was coming from China. And as far as the cheap part of that comment is concerned, the financials really tell you the story. The current nickel price, and let's talk in Aussie dollars because I think it's our currency and it's more relevant, round about $23,000 a tonne. When Nova did its definitive feasibility study back in 2014, their predicted price of production was $4,000. an enormous margin in today's market if that mine could be replicated, which is why I've never had a bother about spending our shareholders' money exploring in the Fraser Range. And if you look at the Indonesian costs, these tend to come from Nickel Industries, who are a publicly listed company in Australia, so I don't think there's any washing of facts here. Their prices range from that $12,000 to $16,700 a tonne, and the MHP cost, and this is the one that's only recently come onto the market, and I think is the direct competitor to our nickel sulphide, is of that order of $9,000 to $12,000 a tonne. And the reason that's comparable is it's a HPAL process. It produces a little briquette, and it gets a 90% payability, 80% payability on the nickel content on the LME price. Now that's basically what the concentrates from Nova, Kalgoorlie, etc. have been traditionally paid. And I think I've sort of jawboned enough at the moment, and what I'd like you to do is just get an idea of the scale of what this Chinese investment in Indonesia is. And I was lucky enough to visit the Morowali Industrial Park in, where do we go, Michael, that one there? Yep, in Sulawesi last year. This is shot out of the window of a 737 coming into land on their own runway. And keep in mind, as this scrolls through, this project did not have first shovel turned until 2018. So what was producing at 2023 of 550,000 tonne of nickel a year in a global market of 3,000, 20% of the world's nickel came from this place, was not here in 2018. The power plants which come up shortly have got the capacity of producing 5.6 gig of power. The Muche power station in WA is about 800 megawatts. It's just stunning that they can do this from a get-go in 2018. And it goes for a minute and a tad, and in our terms, you'd be somewhere out over Upper Swan coming into Guildford as an idea of the scale of this development.
There's another one, not only here, over there also.
And we're just coming up to the main port area shortly.
Same, yeah. Yep. This is not mine. This is the stockpile. Yeah. See the bars? This one. This is the nickel ore. Yes. Yes. 40 minutes, 50 minutes. You arrive. That's why don't sleep. You just sleep.
So there you go. Anybody who talks cheap, to get the dollars to do that sort of stuff, you're talking about mining on an industrial scale. So I think I'll pause at that, Michael.
Thank you. Well, no, thanks for that terrific oversight, and so wonder what the phones that we've all got with a little bit of nickel in them can actually do, that can record some important industrial developments just a few clicks away from here. Cabman, if I can turn to you now, obviously in the last sort of 2 years or so, we've seen quite a few explorers sort of pivot to gold and copper and other minerals, but Western Mines Group has really stayed the course at the Mulga Tank project. Sort of tell us a bit about, I guess, the characteristics of the project and also, I guess, the broader nickel sector that have made you sort of, commit to and keep the faith in what it is that you set out to do 2 or 3 years ago.
Okay, thank you. Yes. I mean, in terms of keeping the faith, part of that has been, I also went with Mark to this Jakarta Nickel Conference again this year as part of our sort of background on it. And yeah, this year was a much, much more somber affair, whereas last year was there's their coming out party and we're going to be ONEC and we're going to control the nickel market. This year, there was comments from head of Tsingshan, nobody is making money at these prices. So certainly a very, very hard floor at that $15,000 a ton. And I think increasingly one of the themes was ESG this year, and whereas last year ESG only meant building solar panels to lower your CO2 intensity of your nickel, this year it was much more holistic, and governors of various islands getting up and very profound comments that you don't inherit the earth from your ancestors, you borrow it from the next generation and things like that. And they're very much increasing or looking to increase the measures. And it's tiptoeing around China. They don't mention China, but that's essentially the elephant in the room, that it's all the Chinese companies that are causing the devastation. So as they tighten that, I think the costs of the Indonesian complex only goes up. They've done very well at managing the ore quotas, which is the input cost into all these large complexes that you see. That's all maintained and owned by the Indonesian government through a quota system. So they've very much got China by the proverbial balls there, and they can limit that supply, which has bid up ore prices, which have been the highest they've ever been currently. And then they've just ratcheted that up again by putting royalties on top of those ore prices. And then just like anywhere, you always go out first, you mine the best grade, you mine the highest grade, closest to infrastructure. And so that's getting more expensive and lower grade. So from a $15,000 a ton floor, we only see prices going up from there, in the longer term. Yes, there's the phenomenon of HPAL that can come in, and that comes in at a lower cost. And so there's a danger there. But as Tsingshan said, nobody's making those CapEx decisions now at this price, because HPAL is a lot more capital intensive per ton of production than any of these others. And so, so that gives us that confidence that if this is a flaw, then, you just need to go and find a project that can make money in that environment. And I'll talk through what, to actually directly answer your question of what we've been doing. I'm just trying to lay the groundwork. We think we've got a very large low-grade project, which, of course, the market hates. I mean, the market hates nickel, and then you give them a low-grade thing, you're insane. But if we think we can get recoverable value per ton of $17, $18 US, and if we think we can mine that in a large, huge open pit operation at $10 a ton US, there's a 50% margin there, for 40 years, 50 years, and we could be making money in the current environment. And that's, we haven't done that work yet. We're still exploring and defining that. But if you look 3-4 years ahead of us, there's many Canadian companies out there like Canada Nickel, 10x our market cap, doing feasibility studies on 0.22% nickel ore bodies. We've got 25-30% higher grade than that, 4 times the sulfide content. So we think we're in a bit good position. We don't make the rules, we just follow them. So just directly to jump into us then and what we've been up to since this time last year. Obviously the first through till about February, that was very dark days. We certainly very much battened down the hatches. We were doing our technical work on a first resource. Just to remind people where we are. We're about 2 hours east of Kalgoorlie, our Mulga Tank project, where we're exploring undercover. We've got a whole belt here of what we think is an entire new nickel sulfide system that we've found, that we own 100% of. And we're looking for classic, komatiite, dunite hosted, type 1, type 2 systems like you found in Western Australia, like a Perseverance or like a Mount Keith. Zoom in onto the Menigual belt. So yeah, we're frontier here. We're under 60 meters of sand cover. This is an aeromag image, but just stepping back and drawing a long bow on some sort of macro sort of architecture type stuff. This is Hayward's paper from 2024 of where do you find large nickel deposits, and it's within 30 kilometers of large translithospheric faults. Well, that's exactly where we are. The boundary of the Burtville terrain is just 30 kilometers directly to the west of us. And here we have, coming up through the mantle, we're sitting in the upper crust. We've got these large dunite intrusions. We've drilled the bottom one there, which we've drilled out our first resource on of about 5.3 million tons of contained nickel in sulfide. And then we've stepped out over this end of last year and this year, and we've drilled the first one up the body called the Panhandle. And again, with the help of some EIS grants, we've drilled through that. And again, we've got 800 meter intersections with multiple mineralized komatiite horizons within that. And then there's other deposits, other intrusions, yet to be proved to be deposits further up the belt that are as yet untested. And so we drilled this several years ago, large intersections of beautiful black dunite core, chock full of disseminated pentlandite mineralization. We've drilled this thing out. It's a huge intrusion, about 5 kilometers long, 1,500 meters deep, mineralized all through it. We've gone back and we've drilled essentially just that red box in the top there, and that's where we've drilled our shallow open pit resource. This is what we put out in April. We did this at a 0.2% nickel cutoff, and that's literally just a flex on the Canadians because they do theirs at 0.1, so we thought we'd do twice that. We did look at doing 0.22 because that's the Canada Nickel Reserve grade, but about 1.6 million tons of contained nickel and indicated. That sits in sort of 2 areas. We're going to look to do a bit of infill this year to get one single indicated unit that we can then do a scoping study on. And then there's a bunch of inferred around that, about another 3.5 million tons of inferred. We advertise, obviously, all the cobalt, the chalcophile elements, not to say we're necessarily going to be a copper or a PG producer at those grades, but it's just to really try and emphasize that we think this is very much a primary magmatic system of disseminated pentlandite, whereas a lot of those Canadians are just secondary altered dunite systems. And we're very proud of the fact that we have 4 times the sulfur content that those guys have, and our recoveries should be linear in related to sulfide versus them. So that puts us as comfortably the largest nickel sulfide deposit in Australia. You've got to be something. You've got to be the biggest. You've got to be the highest grade. You've got to be something unusual. Yes, it's dark days and there's no other nickel companies around, but if the market does come back, they're going to be looking for someone, and so our angle or our marketing thing is that we're the biggest and people might come back to us in a few years' time. But this isn't just a Mount Keith disseminated system. We're getting increasingly convinced this is a hybrid system more akin to Perseverance. We see lots of evidence for massive sulfide, large sulfide segregations, remobilized massive sulfide in veins. We even see that in some of the shallow drilling, even within that open pit, some kind of nice high-grade intervals, sort of 5 meters at 2% in really just 30-40% sulfide content, sort of semi-massive, really pointing to the tenor of this system. And so, the hunt now, whilst on the one side, we've got a large disseminated open pit that we'll look to prove up through scoping studies. We really want to go and look to find out what's at depth here, and we really believe there could be some sort of monster at the base of this. We've drilled some intersections of 100, 150 meters at sort of 0.5% nickel, and within that there's some sort of more coarser disseminated intervals of sort of 1 to 1.5% over 6-8 meters. That's not too far away from a Perseverance discovery hole, we don't think. Like, Perseverance discovery hole was drilled in feet. I think it was about 350 feet at about 1.5% nickel. And only about 4 meters of that was a massive sulfide component at the base of it. It's just a large, disseminated, coarsening up halo. And so we think we're maybe clipping the fringes of things like that. And if we can just find the right drill hole, targeting with putting down some of these large diamond holes that we're drilling, then we think there's a Perseverance or multiple Perseverances there to be found in this system. We've drilled, and just some of that confidence we're getting be able to predict the architecture of this. We very much see this active zone at the base of this intrusion. There's a 200-meter thick zone that we can map over kilometers. In that, we see these high-grade sulfidic melt pockets, and which we think are maybe rip-up class and remobilization of some of these, a massive sulfide. Just to think that we've drilled 13 deep diamond holes over, call it 4 square kilometers, and in every single one of those we hit these tennis ball size massive sulfide globules. The probability of doing that, if it was just one tennis ball bouncing around inside this thing, is just it's just insane how sort of what an active zone we think this is. We just need to find where this is coalescing and joining. And so what we are doing, we're into some more drilling at the moment. We've gone back to the western margin, which we think is shallower, and we can hit this 200-meter thick zone at a higher elevation, obviously saving money and being potentially better economics. So we're drilling some diamond tails to our RC holes, looking to target sort of 300-400 meter diamond extensions to what we've already drilled, targeting this enriched zone, looking for perseverance. We've drilled a few extension holes to our resource, and we'll look to infill that and upgrade that. And then, with courtesy of some more EIS funding, again, we've stepped up to the Panhandle, and we're proving that there's a second satellite body to this, and then potential multiple satellite bodies up the belt. Once you get outside this large dunite intrusion, it gets interesting in that it's clearly a different environment. You get more sort of dynamic changes in grain sizes and things like that. It looks more komatiitic flow type environment versus the dunite intrusion. And so I think that's kind of where we are. Watch this space. We'll be hopefully drilling through to the end of the year, and we'll keep going in this nickel market. It's fine for us.
Yep. Thanks, Kedman. We'll definitely come back shortly and pick apart some of those finer details. But obviously, yeah, if we can hand the mic to Alan, Alan, Miramar's main game's sort of always been the Gidgee Gold project next to the super pit there in Kalgoorlie. Pretty much since you IPO'd, but you've always had the Bangamore nickel project in your back pocket. And over a very short period of time, you've now moved that from concept to getting the involvement of one of the industry's most prolific players. Can you tell us a little about that journey?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. When we listed back in 2020, we put together a portfolio of projects, and as you said, there were two main sort of groups. There was our, Eastern Goldfield stuff, Gidgee and Glandore. We referred to them as a sort of bread and butter Eastern Goldfields projects, well located, low economic threshold if you found something. And then we had a couple of projects up in the Gascoyne, that Capricorn Origin. One of them was the Bangamore project, which I'll talk about, and also our Onslow Copper Gold project. And the idea with those was always about doing something a bit more high risk, high reward, but also trying to prove the concept and then getting a partner to help us explore those, because they were going to have, bigger price tags to do the work. So, yeah, it's great that we've, a few weeks ago announced that we've got Sumitomo in, non-binding term sheet. We're working through the final sort of JV agreement on that, and that's a real tick in the box for the concept and the work that we've done. So I might just walk through a couple of slides, because it's sort of an interesting idea. It's a bit new for Western Australia, and it sort of takes a little bit of explanation. So this is the Bangamore. That's a nice view up in the Gascoyne there. That's a flat-lying dolerite sill intruding into sedimentary rocks. Just echoing what Mark said, why look for nickel in the current market? We're looking for a particular type of nickel, mafic intrusion-hosted nickel. It's probably more correctly called copper-nickel PGE deposits. And pretty simply, they're large and they're very valuable. And again, echoing some of Mark's comments, if you look at that, tonnage grade curve there, and the green ones are the mafic deposits. There's some really big deposits out there, multiple deposits that are, plus million tonnes nickel and copper. Norilsk is obviously the big granddaddy of them all, but you've got things like Jinchuan, Voisey Bay, and then closer to home, Nova Bollinger and Nebo Babel. Generally, they're, higher grade than the layered intrusions, and they're really valuable. They're always, low cost producers, and again, that cost curve is a couple of years old, but again, echoing what Mark said, Norilsk has actually got a negative operating cost because it gets so much credits from copper and PGEs. And, the lowest cost Australian asset is Nova. So, this is why we're looking for these deposits, and it really doesn't matter what the nickel price is. If you find one of these, you'll make money. So, hang on. So just a real quick summary of Norilsk, and there's at least one person in this room that knows a lot more about Norilsk than me. Multiple big deposits hosted within mafic sills, differentiated mafic sills, so they're not ultramafic rocks, they're not komatiites. Interestingly, the formation of Norilsk was actually responsible for the biggest extinction event across the world the Permian Triassic mass extinction. The total value of that camp is in the trillions of dollars, and the largest single deposit, the Oktyabrsky deposit, has more copper than Olympic Dam and Escondida together, and is worth about $500 billion. So, you know, these are big deposits and very valuable, as I said. Just a real simple cross-section there. You've got a sedimentary basin, and these you know, mafic sills intrude into that, and then they form these chonolith bodies with, you know, massive sulfides at the bottom, and then copper and PGEs at the top. So why the Bangamore? So this is just a summary of about 20 years' work of state and federal governments in this area. Back in 2004, so only a few years after Nebo Babel was discovered, there was a recognition of the Warrakoona Large Igneous Province, which is this large mafic province that stretches from Onslow right across the middle of Australia. And there's a number of these mafic, intrusive and volcanic events that are related to that large igneous province, and they're all about the same age, about 1070 million years old. And the Bangamore is part of that. The Bangamore sills are part of that, and they're the same age as the Giles complex, which hosts the Nebo de Babel deposit. So that was a sort of a place to start. So GSWA sort of postulated that, you know, there was all different sort of deposit styles that could be hosted in this Warrakoona Large Igneous Province, from, you know, Nebo and Babel out in the Giles complex to the east there, and then the Norilsk style deposits in the Bangamore, where you've got these sills intruding into the basin. And the thing you needed was a big plumbing system for that to occur. So in 2010, there was Geoscience Australia and GA did seismic lines across the Capricorn origin and some MT, and they showed that you've got these big, deep mantle-tapping faults that go right down to the Moho, and that's where your mafic material is coming up and intruding into the basin. So, you know, there's a tick in the box for your plumbing system and your architecture. In 2013, they did a big EM survey across the whole Capricorn, giant EM survey, and, you know, picked up a lot of conductors through that Bangamore Basin area, Edmund Collier Basin area. But the line spacing was, I think, 4 kilometres, so really coarse spaced. And then the thing that sort of piqued my interest really was 2016, Geoscience Australia put out this nickel atlas for the whole of Australia, and you can see that sort of Bangamore area is highlighted with a nice little red blob there. So that's really what got us interested. There's about 20 years' work of state and federal governments without which we couldn't have sort of had the confidence to go into this area. So having said that, you know, the real scale potential predicted by GSWA, Geoscience Australia and CSIRO. So the key ingredients that we needed to see were an extensive volume of mafic magma. So that's your heat source and your metal source, and we've got that. The deep crustal scale faults, we've got that. And then the other thing is that with the Norilsk deposits, you need a huge amount of external sulphur. And the idea is that the nickel in the magma mixes with the sulphur in the sediments and produces sulfides. So we've got that as well. There's plenty of units throughout the Edmund and Collier Basin that have got sulfides or sulfates, the stromatolites and that. So on the basis of that, we started targeting and pegged some ground. We were a first mover up here back in 2020. We've sort of had some ground that we've dropped and moved on as the results sort of didn't really show what we wanted. And then the current land position as it stands at the moment is those red tenements. Tech are right next door to us, and notably Chalice have just picked up some ground here as well. So this is the model. This is the sort of basic Norilsk style model. As I said, the mafic magma comes up through those big structures. It goes through the sedimentary basin. If we're lucky, it picks up some sulphur from either a sulphitic shale or a vaporite. It gets to the point where the sulphur saturates, starts to form disseminated sulfides, and then if we're really lucky, we'll form a chonolith, and it'll start to form cumulate rocks where the minerals drop out. And again, bearing in mind this is a mafic rock, but it starts to form olivine and things like that. It gets more ultramafic just through differentiation. So you form those cumulate rocks, and then hopefully you form a chonolith. And this is an example of a Norilsk style chonolith. They're not that big. They're only, a couple of 100 metres across and a few 100 metres long. The nice red material down the bottom is all the massive sulfides, but typically you also get some secondary sort of copper and PGEs right up the top, which is that orange material that you see. So what we had to do is we had to work out whether this process had actually happened in the Bangamore. We started at the Mount Vernon project. We did an airborne survey, some ground EM, we did some rock chip sampling, and we started to see evidence for differentiation. We started to see gabbros and sulfides, but didn't really have a good sort of handle on the petrology. We then got some EIS funding for an RC drilling program last year that we did, and as a result of that, that was really the game changer. So just an example of one of the RC holes there with the profiles. We saw the differentiated sills that we needed to see. We saw the mafic cumulates, and that rock sample there is a sample of olivine gabbro norite actually sitting on the surface with disseminated nickel and copper sulfides in it. And we saw in seven holes, we saw disseminated chalcopyrite and pentlandite, albeit, only sort of half to 1%, but it showed that the process had occurred. And one of the other interesting things was that we saw gypsum within the dolerite. So that was evidence that the dolerite's gone through some of these evaporite units, through stromatolites and things, and picked that up. So this was really the game changer, showing that we're in a live, fertile province. So on the back of that, we got EIS funding. We picked up some more ground to the east. We've got EIS funding for another VTEM survey, which we've literally just got the data for. This is hot off the press. And so we've got a number of late-time EM conductors. Hopefully some of them will be sulfides, and hopefully at least one of them might be some massive sulfides. And as a result of that, we managed to attract Sumitomo to the project, and as I said, we've now done a JV with them. One thing to note here is the scale. Up in the top right corner, that's the Norilsk camp at the same scale as Bangamore. So given what I said before, that's worth trillions of dollars, and the Oktyabrysky deposit is worth $500 billion by itself, you're looking for a needle in a haystack, but if you find that needle, it's a very valuable prize. So we're really excited about working with Sumitomo. The next steps are formalising that JV agreement, which hopefully we do by the end of the month. We've got to model up the VTEM data, get on the ground, do some more rock chip sampling and some ground EM. Probably have to do some heritage surveys and things, and then hopefully drilling next year. The great thing is that this area is lots and lots of outcrop. The dolerite sills outcrop. You can walk from upper contact to lower contact. So you're only talking about, RC drilling down to sort of 150 metres or so. You're not talking about deep drilling. We've got no cover. So it's a pretty good place to work with some pretty spectacular geology. New idea, new deposit style. It's a bit like, being serious and going out to the Fraser Range back in 2012. So pretty exciting time for the company.
Excellent. Thanks, Alan. So we're nearly out of time after all of those presentations. So, but I've got a few quick questions that we'll go through, and in the meantime, please think up some questions, and we'll get some roving mics to you shortly. But perhaps if I can ask you, Mark, having just listened to Alan's presentation, and obviously you've got ground right near, I guess, the last big nickel discovery in WA being Nova. Is a potential big nickel discovery like what Alan's talking about, is that what's sort of needed to, I guess, break this cycle that we've had with market interest in nickel?
Oh, absolutely, Michael. And, that's what took Legend to the Fraser Range back in 2015. We had the Nova discovery in our back pocket. We had a belief in the belt. I don't mind sharing with you because it'll be all public knowledge, but Legend spent $60 million there exploring over the past decade, and we discovered the Mawson deposit. Unfortunately, it's not large enough to be a standalone on its own, but any of you who want the next Mawson story, Chris Crawford, can you put your hand up? This bloke here, he only did it like this. Stick it up. Chris will tell you why there's still a life at Mawson. But these discoveries, the lifeblood of our industry, you have to be a bit crazy, you have to be a bit optimistic, but that's what makes this game tick.
Excellent. And Cadman, I know obviously from your slides that you're now in possession of the largest nickel sulphide resource on the ASX there. I'm assuming that's an undeveloped one on that scale, but has that given you any extra impetus in conversations that you're having with the market?
Yes, I mean, conveniently, we had a lot of ASX queries over that chart, and my pushback is that they're all in the same stage, right, because none of them are producing. But yes, I think, I mean, yeah, there's some dark days, but I think it's definitely picking up. We've certainly had a lot more inbound inquiries over the last 5 to 6 weeks, for sure. You know, brokers that wouldn't spit on you 9 months ago are now calling for a update of what's going on. So, yeah, I think we're through the worst of it. We see light at the end of the tunnel. Yeah, for sure.
For sure.
Improving sentiment.
Excellent. And Alan, I also listened with interest to something that we've discussed in the past, being this this mystery nickel atlas that you seem to be the one who stumbled across that. But correct me if I'm wrong, but that also led to the discovery that Chalice made at Gonneville as well.
Yeah, that's right, and that's how I actually came across it the first time, because you know I was focused in gold for sort of best part of 10 years and wasn't really keeping the eye on the ball on nickel. But yeah, not long after Chalice made the discovery at Julimar, I think Alex was interviewed by one of the mining journals and was talking about this nickel atlas, and I'm like, what's this nickel atlas? And so, and you know, this was probably 2019, and again, like full credit to GSWA and GA and that for collecting this sort of really pre-competitive regional data, because that enabled us to sort of test the concept, you know, trying to generate that from scratch. You know, we're probably in a lot better position than the guys that went out the Fraser Range. There wasn't that sort of data in the early days out there, but the Capricorn's been a real focus for the different government departments. So, yeah, and there was an area that showed up in a few different data sets. And then the first thing I did was sort of zoomed into a few areas and then did my own sort of project scale or district scale stuff. And it was, you know, it was a lot different, or a lot better than sort of at the regional scale. So, yeah.
Sure. And Mark, just following on from what Alan's talking about there with this sort of outside thinking and being a little bit different to the mould, you know, well, I guess what sort of encouragement can you give to the members in the audience about sort of how to think outside the box that might lead to a potential company making discovery?
That's certainly a tricky question to answer. Michael, look, all I can do is in my Fraser Range experience, I was always interested in looking for things that I thought could be company makers. And what was particularly easy to express that view is look at that thing over there called Nova, which took Sirius from $20 million to $2 billion in the space of a couple of years. And you've got to have some good sound geology. I'm not a geologist, but Alan certainly put a pretty compelling case there for his project. But the concept has to be there that the event may have occurred. Cademan made mention to that also with his little globules of massive that he's getting in consecutive drill holes. So, look, you have to have the right science. You've got to be able to back it with the money. And if you're diligent at that process, you give yourself the best chance of success.
Sure. And Cadman, you know, you're exploring in, I guess, what's defined as a mature belt for nickel exploration to an extent, perhaps not. But are you applying a sort of, I guess, different level of thinking to what might have gone on there previously, or is it very much sort of that old school approach?
I'd certainly refute the mature belt. Yeah, when we picked up this project in 2020, there'd actually only been 12 holes drilled through the sand cover anywhere into the dunite over quite a large area. So, but 9 of those 12 holes did have visible nickel sulfide in, which is why we liked it and picked up the project. In terms of tools that we're using, no, I don't think we're doing anything different. We're undercover, there's no outcrop, so there's geophysics and a lot of modelling that way. I think more than anything, it's just being persistent and sticking with it, in that every time we drill, we find something new, we keep seeing nickel sulfide, we keep getting glimpses of it getting better, and so we think we're progressing, versus, how do you make a discovery? Is first of all, you've got to want to go and make a discovery. These other companies that 1 week they're trying to do rare earths, and the next week they've gone and bought an antimony project, and now, there's something's clocked up near Mountain Pass, and we're all going to go and do a rap video. None of those guys are they actually trying to make a discovery? I don't believe they are. Like, we've had to stick with this for 4 years, and we keep going through our process, and we just got to believe it's there, and you've got to put a lot of hard work in to make a discovery. Yeah.
Fantastic. And lastly, Alan, in the past with nickel exploration, we've always seen big company involvement sort of assist in the process, whether it's been Western Mining or BHP, say, over the last 30 years. Are we perhaps seeing that now with Sumitomo and the involvement that we've got? And also, do we need that big brother or sister support to deliver these big discoveries that we're all hoping to see?
Yeah, I mean, that was always as I said, that was always our sort of aim for Bangor, was to prove the concept and get a big brother. And, some investors don't like that. It's like, you're selling the farm. But, it was a farm that was worth zero. So I think it was a good quote in the Pay Dirt magazine, I'd rather have 10 or 20% of a Norilsk than 100% of nothing. So you've seen there's a few joint ventures around at the moment. Teck have done a deal with Dreadnought up to the sort of northwest of us, up at the Money Intrusion there. Without sort of sounding arrogant, it's like, the little guys come up with the ideas and then need the help and the finance to sort of push it through. And that, that's what I like doing, like coming up with the concept and then trying to get it to a point where, you can create some value from that concept. So, but I think the same in gold. I think, the bigger companies, especially the gold producers that are making heaps of money at the moment, should be helping the explorers test the concepts if it's a sound geological concept. They, definitely in nickel where you can make really big discoveries. They should be helping out more, I think.
Fantastic. All right. Well, we've got time for some questions. If anyone from the audience would like to put something to our panellists. Just at the front here. Well, we'll get a microphone to you, Natalia.
Thank you. Mainly a question to Kedmon. I guess you're looking for something that looks to me like West Musgraves. And in fact, the team that you have some people that have been involved in the discovery, as far as I understand. Considering that West Musgraves is not operating, how do you perceive that situation in attracting investment into building another project like that?
Yeah, brilliant.
I'm sorry, it's not an easy question, I know.
No, exactly. Yeah, lots of thoughts on that. In terms of the team, yes, we have Dr. Ben Gruick is our technical director, leading our exploration, who is a world expert on things like Mount Keith and was also involved in Nebo Bell. So large, low-grade nickel is his forte. In terms of what we're exploring for, I think we kind of think of it in two silos, if you like. We have this large, open-pittable, disseminated sulfide body. The economics on that, as I alluded to, we think there's 2 billion tons there that is mineable on a 1.5 to 1 strip ratio. So yes, ours is a 0.27, 0.28 ore body, but we need to move 2.5 tons to get 1 ton. You compare that to, say, a Mount Keith that, yes, it's twice the grade, but current strip ratio at Mount Keith is like 8-9 to 1. Their definition of ore, anecdotally, we understood before they closed, was 5 to 1 strip ratio with 0.15 recoverable nickel. And so we think we beat all those metrics. And then again, you look at Canada Nickel, 0.22% reserve grade, similar to us, 1.8 to 1 strip ratio. We think it works as a large low-grade system, that portion of our exploration, and so we'll keep advancing that. Of course, then you've got the thing that everyone turns around and goes, well done, you're a crappy little junior company, how are you going to fund $2 billion of CapEx? And the moment we just part that conversation, let's just get further down the track to see what those numbers look like. And then in the meantime, we really believe that there is some high grade to find around this entire belt. Not only at depth, but then as we tiptoe out into these what look more like very dynamic channels, it's a slightly different system, and maybe we can find smaller high grade pods. Maybe we can find 20, 30, 40,000 tons at 2% nickel close to surface, and we can develop things ourselves that doesn't require that large capex. But yeah, it's the perennial question. Certainly in low grade, you find it, then you get cursed with the fact, well, how are you going to fund a huge capex project as a junior company? But yeah.
We also have a question.
While you're there, Caedmon, or anyone on the panel, we talked a lot about the Canadians. Why do we think that they've continued to hold value and we haven't? And how do we bridge the gap?
Scotty, I know nothing about Canada.
I know that they have good market caps over there.
Yeah, no. I mean, you're going to say anything? I'll say a comment after you.
That's a good question. Having been a gold miner and going to Denver Gold Conference and hearing some of the things that CEOs of TSX companies tell stockbrokers and investors, it's really hard to compete with them on market cap a lot of the time. Definitely stuff that we wouldn't be able to say. There's always huge valuation gaps between TSX companies and ASX companies. It's something that's really frustrating, especially when you're, again, talking with a gold hat on, when you're making lots of money and then they sort of look at you and go, no, something's not right here. Why is your market cap that when we just heard from this guy and his market cap's 10 times yours? Must be something you're not telling us. Yeah, I don't know. It's just it's a different market, different amount of money going through it, and I have to say, without being rude, they're different sort of promoters as well.
Yeah, I mean, I had just two comments that jumped to mind related to me, and certainly us riding on the coattails of Canada Nickel, or as we like to think we are. Mark Selby is an incredible promoter, and all I need to do is him to threaten to build this thing. And if we can come along behind demonstrating scoping studies that's better on every single line of a deposit than him, then first guy through the wall gets bloody, and we can just walk through the gap that he makes. But that's the first point. Second point, I think you're starting to see now the whole critical minerals and geopolitics and the thematic. The US government and North American governments are actually writing checks to do it. He thinks he's going to get $600 million off them and things like that. And you're seeing that thematic really pick up now, whereas, I don't think I can turn around to the Australian government and get 600 million of capex to build this thing. So, maybe there's that as well.
Excellent. All right. We might have time for one more question if there are any takers. Oh, yep, one at the very back. Oh, there's just a microphone coming your way so we can all hear you.
This question's for Mark. Mark, do you believe there's another Nova out at Fraser Range?
I've got no doubt there is. The question is how deep it is. It was one of the characteristics of Alan's thing. I could see Derek just squirming in his seat when he talked about rocks pointing out of the ground and the two contacts are all there for you to see. We're under 150 metres of cover where we discovered Mawson. And the challenges of that are serious, and challenge equals money. And the one thing that hasn't come up in this session today is the sentiment in Australia and why it is so. And I think BHP is the answer. Once they close Nickel West, It's just very, very difficult for anybody to try and get excited about going exploring for nickel. So I've probably disappeared off the question a wee bit, but yes, I do believe so, but I think it'll be very deep.
So, Mark, you say that your company spent 60 million. Well, if you take into account the 660 million that IGO spent, that's a lot of money spent out in the Fraser Range just for one Nova.
Yeah, and one Mawson. We actually made that discovery. I'll let the IGOites talk to their success or otherwise. But look, I just don't know how to say other than something I said earlier. It's about the science, the people and the rigour, and just making sure that you're spending in a good place. And I must give a plug to the Australian government through their R&D incentive scheme. Legends received $17 million across 10 years from that, and we would not have discovered Mawson without it. It's due credit to Deloitte's for putting us onto it in the way that we've prosecuted that case. But that's just another aspect of the difficulties of finding that sort of money to drill holes.
One last question, Mark. You've left the nickel at Rockfords and gone chasing gold. Are you going to go back to the Fraser Range looking for nickel?
Well, we haven't left the Fraser Range yet. We still have our tenement position there, and as I alluded earlier, Chris is the guy to go to if you want to understand why he's got the geochemistry, the seismic, the structural models which indicate that we could be close to where we need to be at Mawson. But, look, we're dealing with a very uncommercial legal firm who are representing the native title people there, and they've got some entirely, unrealistic financial expectations. And that's going to be our biggest hurdle, because I'm certainly not prepared to be taking legend there and drilling holes, ground disturbing, without native title clearance.
Fantastic. On that note, I should actually say that one question which I didn't get a chance to get to, Mark, was that in an article you did in Pay Dirt August 2014, when the company had exited Africa, you actually said that we're committed to the Fraser Range and we'll be there long after everyone else is gone. So I guess to some extent that's still proven correct to this day.
Yes, it is, Michael. Thank you for reminding me of that.
Yeah. And speaking as well of Alan's comment about Alex's interview in a mining journal, I believe that was called Australia's Pay Dirt, July 2021. So all the good stuff is in that magazine. Make sure you pick up your copy.
Yeah.
On that note, if you could please thank our panellists.